All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. How is everybody doing this morning?
Not bad. How you doing today?
I am doing good. All right, so today's training is an intro to commercial real estate. And I know that some of you are in pre-licensing, and we've got a new licensee here that probably has not had a chance to really, or maybe has not had the opportunity to look into commercial real estate. So commercial residential real estate is my niche. That is what I have done my entire career. It's been very, very lucrative. But commercial is its own animal and very unlike residential real estate. So there's a lot of things that you have to do and a lot of stuff that you have to know in regards to commercial real estate and working with investors that just make it very, very complex. So this intro to commercial real estate is going to get you familiar with the processes, some of the terms, and we're really just going to touch on a lot of different areas with commercial real estate. So when somebody starts having those conversations with you, you'll be able to recognize some of the stuff that they're talking about. Now, we will have follow-up training in regards to commercial real estate when we're talking about different forms of commercial. And there are many different forms of commercial real estate that we're going to cover in this training a little bit. And they're all very, very different. So this is really going to give you the 10,000 foot view into commercial real estate and really some of the steps that you're going to need to take to complete your first transaction. All right, so now that it's 5 minutes after, we're going to go ahead and dive in here. And let me get myself oriented here. All right, so first is residential or commercial and understanding the unique similarities and differences between the two. Sorry, I'm working off of my other computer space here, so I may be a little slower at this than normal. All right, understanding property types. So most of us are familiar with what residential real estate looks like. You know, residential real estate is likely, not always, but likely the homes that we live in, the homes we grew up in, unless you grew up in an apartment complex. If you grew up in a, single family home that was owned by your parents or your guardians, that is what residential real estate is. Residential real estate also includes things like condominiums, townhouses, and multifamily properties, so apartments less than 4 or less. So we're talking about things like duplexes and triplexes are often classified as residential real estate. And that is classified that way for listing purposes and for lending purposes as well as zoning purposes. So think of it as single family homes, condominiums, townhouses, and any type of structure that has less than 4 or less residential residences with no type of commercial involved. So no storefronts or anything like that attached to it. Now, commercial real estate has a wide variety of property types, and those can be things like office buildings, retail centers, industrial warehouses, hotels, motels, healthcare facility, mixed use developments, or any type of residential unit that has more than 4 apartments. So we're talking about anything that has 5 apartment units, the whole way up to hundreds of them, like you see in the big high buildings that have bunches of apartments in them, and anything that we classify as mixed use, which would be our Elwood City office has 2 commercial spots on the bottom and then 2 residential spots at the top. That would also be considered commercial. There's a huge difference with your target market when we're talking about the differences with residential to commercial. So obviously with the residential real estate, we're targeting homeowners and families, and we're also targeting tenants, or what's not listed on here, sometimes the single family residential landlord working for commercial purposes, which we're not going to get into in here because that's a whole nother layer, but we will get into that on a follow-up. On one of our follow-up trainings. Commercial real estate targets business, investors, developers, institutional clients like hedge funds, that are looking for things for commercial purposes. And that covers things like office spaces, retail storefronts, either because they're going to put their own business in or they're going to rent those out to tenants, industrial facilities, as well as a whole host of other things. Like myself, I target commercial investors who are looking to purchase residential properties for business purposes. So there are very, very many layers to the onion when it comes to commercial. There's no two specific ways to do anything. So as I said before, this is just the beginning. There's a ton of different ways to do things, a ton of different target markets that you're going to encounter, but we're going to go over the very infant, 10,000 foot overview of commercial here. All right, so what are some differences in the transaction process? So residential real estate transactions, they involve emotional consideration. So you take your client out who's looking to buy their first time home. They know that they want to get at least a 2-bedroom because let's hypothetically say that they're a new couple who's just married. And even though they don't have children, children aren't out of the question. Maybe, they'll get blessed with a child one day and they just want to have that extra bedroom to be prepared. They want something in a certain neighborhood. Maybe it's the neighborhood they grew up in, and they want to be close to their family and their community. So these desires for them to purchase residential real estate are purely emotional. The emotional attachment consideration that they have to the property is way more important sometimes than the property itself. Where in comparison, commercial real estate transactions, they're not emotional at all. There is no emotion behind it. And in many cases, not in 100% of cases, but in many cases, the commercial real estate investor will never even see that property. They're relying on you to be their eyes and ears and tell them whether this is going to be a good financial investment for them. They don't really care about who lives in the neighborhood. And a lot of times they have no idea who's part of the community. All they want to know is if the money that they're going to put in is going to be duplicated when they go to take their money out. Sometimes with commercial real estate transactions, they are a little bit more complex. They involve longer negotiation periods and due diligence processes. There's all kinds of different environmental studies, feasibility studies that go into it. Oftentimes, there's a team of attorneys. So you have attorneys that represent the seller on their side. You have attorneys that represent the buyer on the other side. Sometimes you have attorneys that represent the real estate brokerages that are involved. Plus, a lot of times you have a title and settlement company that's involved. So there's a ton of different people and each one plays an important role depending on how big the commercial transaction may be on the back end. So just looking ahead real quick for, what's coming kind of like to the Pittsburgh area. And I don't know if any of you guys pay attention to any of the commercial news or anything like that, but Pittsburgh for the year of 2024 has been named #1 in rising markets across the United States. So that's been huge. And another reason why we've rolled out this commercial training a lot faster than we really expected to. So each year, there's multiple sources out there that say, what's the hot target markets for this year? And Pittsburgh was #1. And Pittsburgh has been in the top 10 for the last probably 10 years running. We have a huge amount of investors in our market area. And that is what has made me so successful over my tenure as a real estate agent is I was able to attract those out of area investors to come in and give Pittsburgh a try. So what makes Pittsburgh such a hub for commercial real estate investors? And there's two things that I think are just very, very important that we're looking at that's really skyrocketing Pittsburgh as the it place to invest your money. And one is our technology and innovation. So we have emerged as a hub for tech and innovation, and we have a growing presence of tech companies, startups, and research institutions that are currently set up in Pittsburgh and are planning to come to Pittsburgh. So, as as with most real estate, it is monkey see, monkey do. So, as other investors are coming in and placing their money and placing their trust, putting their foothold down here in Pittsburgh, other companies are watching and following suit. So as the bigger companies are coming in with tech, then all of the other companies are coming in and following because it is building up our infrastructure here in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's also done a really great job over the last 20 years at revitalization and redevelopment. If you have not taken a trip down to the Strip District or to Lawrenceville lately, I really suggest that you do, because it is high time you see the difference in these areas as opposed to 10 years ago. They have taken these, what was once a very rundown experience, to these little micro markets within Pittsburgh, and have really turned these around and retooled them into these thriving neighborhoods that are bringing in just a ton of business, a ton of out-of-state people to live, to work, and to enjoy these areas. They are repurposing just about everything in the Pittsburgh market, including our train stations and our old shutdown steel mills. So I suggest you take a day trip down to Pittsburgh, to these little cities, and really get a grasp for what's going on, because these revitalization projects is what's going to help you sell the idea of bringing an investor into the area. It's really, really important that you know this information, and not just from reading it in the paper. You're really going to have to go down there and experience it. So when you're talking to somebody like I'm talking to you and selling you on this, go out and try your hand at commercial, you can hear the enthusiasm in my voice. You can hear that I'm not just reading off the script. I've been there. I've seen it. I love it. I enjoy it. And this is the information that I provide to my investors when selling them on the Pittsburgh market. So go down, take a trip. If this is something at the end of this training that you are interested in and you think Pittsburgh is just as great as I do, you're going to have to go down there and experience it so that you can sell this market to other people. All right, let's get in with some commercial listings. So very first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start with research. And commercial listings have a lot of research involved in them. It's not as easy to research commercial properties as it is our residential properties. And if you've been on any of the trainings that I've had in the past in the regards to residential listings, you know that we have lots of tools available where we can go on our computer and we can plug in the address, and then all of the demographics and everything do pop up. And it makes it really, really easy for us to tell our residential sellers, like, hey, this is what the market is holding. Here's your comps. I literally know everything about your property with a click of a button. And even though commercial real estate has really come a long way over the last, I wouldn't even say 10 years, but more so the last 5 years, and information is now way more readily available, there are additional steps that you're going to have to do and some things that you're going to have to learn about the property to really help you hone in on what the property is worth and what you can do with it. So the first thing you have to do is you have to understand the market trends in that area. So you're going to have to start your research about things like supply and demand, who's come into the area, who hasn't come into the area, what are those little micro target markets. Maybe you have a listing coming up that's like in a developed area. Let's take the city of Newcastle, for example. It's really, really easy to know off the top of your head that if you are on Wilmington, up in Neshannock, what that market is like. Anywhere on Highland Avenue and Wilmington, those areas are prime for retail. There's just stuff popping up all over the place. Some of the vacant properties, even down into the city line, are now being redone and retooled. And it takes you 2 minutes to drive through Neshannock Township to understand the market trends there. But let me ask you this: how much more difficult is it if you have a commercial listing that is on West Washington Street? And how much more difficult is it to understand the trends downtown as opposed to Neshannock Township, where everybody is? So it is important to know and important to research that demographic and those market trends before talking to your client and having any type of presentation for them. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull that data, and we're going to show you how, but you do have to be really versed on it. One thing you don't want to do is assume that you know the market data and not check your work. Commercial is all about the money. Remember, it's not about the emotion. You're not going to go in, you're not going to tell a story, you're not going to paint the picture. You're going to go in with the financial data to back it up. And trust me, if you provide them bad financial data, you will lose that client because they are going to be checking your work. All right, buyer tenant profile. You're going to need to identify what the highest and best use for this property is and who that buyer is going to be. Okay, who's that buyer going to be? If you have an industrial space just outside of town that the seller wants to sell, who is that buyer going to be? Is it going to be another steel mill company? Is it going to be just Mary and Lou Smith from down the street? Are they going to buy it? Likely not. So it's going to require for you to have that market research to say, okay, what's hot now? What is the city of Newcastle lacking? And what is the prime or the ideal buyer to buy this property? Okay. Next is going to be your zoning and your regulations. So you've figured out where the market trends are. You found the need in the market. You have a potential buyer, and now you have to figure out if you list the property, if you find that buyer, is that buyer going to be able to use the property for that purpose? Because remember from your studies that the zoning and regulatory board determines within the city what can be used for the property, where and when. And if the potential buyer wants to use it for a different purpose, you may have to get a non-conforming use or a variance permit. So that is all important information to know before you list the property, not after. All right, so as we were talking about the RPR report or the CMA report that's on the multi-list, those become very easy once you get good at them for residential properties, but it's a little harder with commercial. So you can pull an RPR report for commercial in the RPR system. I can tell you that it will not work 100% of the time. But it is something to check before you do it the old school way, jotting down things on pen and paper. So first step is you're going to go on to the RPR's system, and you're going to input the property details. Very important is you want to make sure that the toggle button is toggled over to commercial and not residential. If you keep it on residential, it's not going to show you anything. So make sure that it's selected to commercial and then click search. After that, you can go ahead and download the report. Even if it doesn't give you comps, which it's very likely that it won't, especially if you have a super unique property, like industrial, or maybe you have a super big building downtown, something that is not really duplicatable. It probably is not going to pull you accurate comps, but what it does pull you is the data for the property and some of the demographics, which are going to be super, super important to your research. All right, so we're looking at an NAR report here, and I'm just going to show you this short video on how to pull that report.
In this video, we'll walk through the property information and my
Hold on one second. We've got a problem here, and I'm not sure why. Hold on one sec.
You'll arrive on the Property Information tab. This page spotlights key facts about a property. Begin by getting a clear view of the property using street or satellite views. Also, if available, view a 3D tour and historical photos. To the right of the property, you'll see basic facts as well as pricing information if the property is for sale or for lease. This property is for lease, so scrolling down, you'll find the suites for lease info, description, and lease details. Under the description, select the plus sign to add your own personal notes, which you can choose to include or not include in your reports. To the right, an interactive map is shown, allowing you to access all the map features, including traffic counts, business points of interest, and data layers like flood zones. If the property is for sale, listing agent information, including contact information, will be displayed below. In some instances, RPR may have more than one version of a listing, or the listing could be for sale and for lease, or there could be multiple suites available in one building. In the multiple listings section, you'll see each record we have from our listing partners. The record that is shaded light yellow is the active record. Select the listing ID to view the additional records. Next, the property facts section includes both public and listing facts for the property. Use the Your Changes column to input additional details. For instance, if the lot size is different from what is reflected in RPR. Also, if there's information missing that you have, such as the ceiling height or cap rate, you can select Add Another Row to add custom rows of information. These changes are only available to you and the reports you create. Select Save to save your changes. Below, find the building summary, which includes suite use, lease price, and tenancy type. Note this will vary from property to property. Additional resources includes links to our partners, such as Valuate the investment analysis software, or take a look at the property on one of our listing partner sites, such as Cruxy, Brevitas, Total Commercial, and CompStack. You'll also see zip form integrations here and Climate Check. Where available, detailed tenant data is displayed to help you understand whether a particular building is a good fit for a client, as well as to understand the tenant mix from an investment standpoint. You can also edit the details of a tenant by clicking the pencil icon to add information such as main contact name, phone number, or business type. Once completed, you can even print out a list of tenants by clicking here. View listing details and miscellaneous details here. Scroll down for interior features, exterior features, location details, including flood zones, owner facts, legal description, including zoning and even plat maps were available. View listing history, including current and historical where applicable. Compare this record against historical records for this property by clicking here. Scroll through to notice the differences. Last, view the public record history, including deed, mortgage, tax, and distressed. Select the arrow to paginate through the records and click View More Details for the full history. To view trade area information, select Trade Area at the top of the page where you'll find economic and demographic info. Watch the Trade Area Details video to learn more. And last, select My Updates to add additional notes or photos to the property. Once you've added any notes you have on the property, select Save. Add any additional notes by selecting Add Note. You can also edit or delete here. Click Photos to add your own photos, then select Upload Photos. To make a photo you've uploaded appear on your report cover page, first select the photo and then click Make Report Cover in the upper right corner. You can also select individual photos in the upper left corner or select all photos here. Once any photos are selected, the ability to delete them appears. Select OK. All notes and photos are automatically added to your reports, but you can unselect them on the reports generation page by unchecking the box labeled My Notes and Photos. And that wraps up our review of the property details page for a commercial property. Be sure to subscribe to the RPR YouTube channel. It's an easy way to learn more about RPR features and tools and stay current on updates and improvements.
All right. So who here has used RPR before to generate a report? Whether it's commercial or residential, have you all had the chance to get in there and kind of poke around?
Yeah, I have.
Perfect. Rebecca, have you gotten into your RPR report yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. It's definitely a great tool. Like I said, whether you're using residential or commercial, it's an awesome tool to have. It saves us so much time because it really integrates everything from all of the different platforms into one easy to use report. So definitely get acquainted with RPR. It is by far my favorite system, and we have quite a few. I mean, you can go on the MLS, you can get this data. You can go onto Relist and get this data. You can go onto each individual website out there, all of the court records and the zoning records and the plat maps, and you can go to the GIS portal for each county and collect all of that data individually. But what I love about RPR, which is included in all of our Board of Association fees that we pay each year, is it really integrates everything into one place. So just my personal opinion, when it comes to NAR membership, I use this like crazy. Sometimes I will use it 50 times a day, just depending on what type of portfolio I am building. This saves me so much time. And before we had these platforms, everything had to be done the old school way, where we were going down to the courthouse and we were pulling actual physical documents, and it took forever just to do one report. So I highly suggest that you get integrated with RPR and that you learn how to use that efficiently, because it is going to make your life so much easier. All right, so identifying the buyer profile and target audience. So just kind of reviewing these things again, more in depth, is we are looking at the demographic, which you just saw one being pulled on RPR. That's where it was showing like what the median income is, where people are working, where they're living, where they're going to school, where they're shopping. You want to know just about everything about the community. So think of the demographic as the community, who lives, works, and breathes within the community. That's your demographic. Okay. Industry specific needs. So identifying the industries that require specific property features or amenities. So think of our new building in Newcastle. When we were looking at it and we looked at lots of different properties, we knew that we had to be location specific. So we wanted to be somewhere in either Shenango, Newcastle, or Neshannock. That was kind of our target location. And then we had to look at certain property features. And since that's going to be our corporate office, it had to have above a certain amount of square footage. We wanted it to be ADA compliant for people with disabilities. So we needed to make sure that the property met those guidelines. We needed to have enough space for offices and enough space for agents and consumers to come in. We needed to have fun space in there. So after searching and searching and searching, we finally found the property that was specific to our needs. Location relevance. The location perfectly aligned with where we wanted to be in Lawrence County, and that was downtown in Newcastle. So location relevance and evaluating that for your buyer profile or your target audience is super important. And then you're really going to have to do a market demand assessment. You have your potential listing there. You've targeted the buyer that you think would be the ideal candidate to buy this property. Now, what's the supply and demand in that market? How many of these properties are currently available, or how little are there available? That's really going to help you determine what the overall value of the property is. All right, so next we're going to go on to researching zoning regulations for a property. Okay, and these are some steps. If you cannot find the zoning on the RPR site, if you cannot find it by doing a relist, you're going to have to go down to the courthouse, or you're going to have to go to the city municipal building and talk to the zoning officer about what the zoning is. And first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to obtain the property address or legal description. Remember from your studies that the mailing address, 123 Main Street, is not the property address. That is the postal address. The property address is called an APN or PID, also known as a tax identification number. And usually that's a big long list of numbers, sometimes numbers and letters, and that is the property address. So you are going to need that PID number in order to figure out what the zoning for that property is. You're also going to need a copy of the legal description. So a legal description is the description that says lot 1 and 2 of such and such plan, and then it has a bunch of like abbreviations after it that says BD, SH, MB, and it has all of these abbreviations that code tells the recorder of the deeds and the tax assessor what is contained within that parcel. So lots 1 and 2, meaning there are 2 lots and it's in a certain plan, tells them the location. HSE shows them that there's a house. SD tells them there's a shed there. MB tells them there's a mobile home there, and so on and so forth. So you will need to have that legal description. And you could find this legal description on just about any tax card that the seller would have, or that you could pull from the county court office, or on Relist, the Multilist, RPR. Or you can also get this legal description on the deed. Next, you're going to contact the local planning or zoning department. There is usually one representative in every area in the planning or zoning department. This zoning officer would work in a couple different buildings, and usually that would be in the municipal building, in the same building that code enforcement would work in. So the City of Newcastle code enforcement and zoning work together. Depending on your jurisdiction, they may work at the county courthouse. So you could Google that information. Usually this information is readily available just with a quick Google search. And if you're unsure, if you can't find it, I would call the local municipal building and just ask the receptionist who the zoning officer is and how to get a hold of them. Usually they are happy to help. Number 3 is you can access online resources on the city or county website. So I found that it is a lot of times easier just to go on to the county or city website and see if you can find any of that information. A lot of times, even small jurisdictions like Union Township have their zoning maps online, and you can pull that right up and see what those zones are, and they'll tell you what the zoning requirements are for certain areas. If that information is not available online, so if you go up to maybe Sharon in Mercer County, that information is not available online, and you may likely have to take a trip to the courthouse to find out that information. Next, you want to review the zoning maps to determine the property's zoning designation. So you want to make sure that you are checking those maps very carefully to make sure that the property is in fact located in a certain zoning territory. Those maps can be a little hard to read online. Sometimes they can't be blown up. I've found just printing them and then actually looking at them is a little easier. If they have a really advanced website, sometimes you can do a search. You can search the parcel and it'll actually hone in on it. In our area here, being kind of rural where we live and work, sometimes that's not always available. But if you go down to the city of Pittsburgh, that becomes way easier to do. Next, you need to understand the regulations for the zoning district. Okay, so if you pull up a map and the zone says C-1, that is a C1 zoning for that property. But what does that really mean? What you can do is on that county website, you are usually able to pull up their zoning regulations book. You can look up what that term means and what's permitted within that zone. What I can tell you is even though zoning from city to city is very similar and the basic terms are similar, the city itself has the right to put in certain regulations or requirements within that zoning that another city may not. So it's important to pull up the zoning regulations from that specific city where you have your commercial listing. Next, you want to check for overlay zones or special districts. Sometimes you have overlay zones where a zoning may have 2 zoning requirements. So you may have two zoning codes that overlap one another. Research any zoning variances or exceptions. So sometimes you can have commercial properties located in residential neighborhoods. And although it doesn't happen very often, it does occur. And by doing that, the current owner may have a zoning variance or a zoning exception to be located, to have a commercial property located in a residential area. So it's important that you ask and research with that seller to see if they have any type of variance permit and if that variance permit can be transferred to the buyer. Understand that with variance permits, if the seller is currently using the building for one purpose and then the buyer wants to use it for another purpose, it is not likely that that zoning variance will transfer. Many times it has to be like for like. So let's assume we're in a residential neighborhood and there's a Dollar General in a residentially zoned neighborhood, okay? And those are everywhere, right? There's literally a Dollar General every half a mile. But there's a residential neighborhood and you have a Dollar General there. And the Dollar General has shut down and the seller of the building is now listing that property with you. You have found a buyer, but the buyer wants to open a laundromat. So we're going from retail that has a zoning variance into a laundromat. That variance may not transfer and the buyer may be required to get their own variance permit to put the laundromat inside the residential neighborhood where the Dollar General once stood. So that's important for you to understand and to talk to the zoning officer to see if the variance will transfer. It will depend greatly on how that variance was taken by the current seller to determine whether that variance can be transferred to the buyer for their new use of the property. All right. And then if the case is too complex, and we do see this a lot of times, especially when it comes to industrial, you may want to consider having the seller hire a professional for more complex cases that require a lot of legal research. Any questions thus far on this stuff? No, everybody's quiet today. All right. All right, commercial listings. Now we're going to talk a little bit about preparing for the listing. So you've done all of your research. You know everything there is to know about the market. You know everything there is to know about the commercial property itself. You've talked to the seller. They're ready to list. Now what do we do? All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess the property's condition. We've already been through the property once, but this is where you're really coming in and you're conducting a thorough inspection of the property. Usually when I'm talking to the seller for the first time, I'll walk through the property. I'll see all of the units. We'll talk a little bit about tenants. Well, and I'm jotting things down, but I'm really not going in and I'm not turning things on. I'm not measuring rooms. I'm just kind of collecting all of the hypothetical data the first time I'm meeting with the seller so that I have the arsenal that I need to be able to do the research. After I do the research, I'm coming back in and I'm assessing the property in its thorough condition. So that's when I'm going through and I'm making those measurements and I'm asking about the ages of the furnaces. I'm asking more detailed questions about the electrical. We're talking about maintenance. We're talking about what repairs need to be done. We're addressing any of those potential issues that we're assuming a buyer is going to have when they come in and look at the property. And we're coming up with a game plan with the seller. Then we're gathering some documentation. I'm collecting all of the documents related to the property. So if we have any variance permits, I need a copy of that. If we have leases from the tenants, I need a copy of that. If there's any warranties on any of the mechanicals or anything that's in there, I need a copy of that. If there's a manifest list of items that are going to be included with the property, I need that manifest list for that. I need the details. Think of a manifest list of if you're selling a restaurant and all of the equipment is included. What's included? Oh, there's 2 stoves. These are the types of stoves. These are the model numbers of the stoves. This is how old they are. There's a dishwashing machine there. There's a refrigerator there. There's, X amount of dishes, X amount of cups, there's this, that, and the other. You need that whole manifest list together. You're also going to need to know anything that's leased. So security systems, that could be just the regular security systems, that could be camera systems, could be in there. They could have other leased property in there that's specific to the business. And then that lease would then transfer over to the new owner if they're buying the building and the business at one time. Copiers could be leased. Postage machines can be leased. There's just a whole host of things that some people will lease instead of buy. So it's important to gather that documentation and say, okay, these items are owned free and clear and being conveyed with the property. These items are here and they're leased, so they're not owned. So we're not conveying them with the property, but we will transfer the lease or we will terminate the lease and remove these items from the property prior to closing. Then you want to go through your price analysis and you really want to take that market analysis that you've already conducted and really hone down on a price. You want to consider all of the factors that you've taken for the pre-listing and at the listing, and between you and the seller, that's really the time to hone down and say, okay, this is our specific lease price based on all of the research we've done before we got to this point. How do we assess the property conditions? So what are some things you're going to be looking for? First and foremost, location. Look at the location of the property. You want to see what the demand is in that area. You want to know what the size and square footage of that property is. So we want to know how many square feet are in that property. We want to know what the current use of the property is. So what's it currently being used for? Is it its highest and best use? Will it likely be used for that means with the next buyer? We want to look at the overall physical condition of the property. And just like residential homes, commercial properties can vary in condition. Sometimes you show up and it's just a train wreck. And then other times you show up and it's the most beautifully maintained property that you've ever seen. So you want to go ahead and assess the overall condition. You need to know what utilities are available on site. So what utilities are they currently using and what utilities are available to be hooked up? It's not unusual for commercial properties to be all electric or for it to have electric and gas. So it's not the same as residential properties where most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time we're walking in and we're assuming it has public water, public sewage, it has electric, and it has gas for heating. That may not be the same with commercial properties. So you definitely want to ask these questions. What utilities are hooked up and what are available? Sometimes you go to commercial properties, if it's industrial, they may not have any utilities at all. So it's very important to know what can be hooked up. So what public utilities are available that the next buyer can connect. You want to know what permits are needed for operation, and every city and jurisdiction is different based on what their zoning regulations require. So you do want to ask those questions of whether occupancy permits are required to conduct business. You want to know about the age and location of the heating, plumbing, electrical, and communication. So communication is something that you guys are not used to. We're used to looking at the heating, the plumbing, the electrical on our single family homes, but you do want to look at communications. Is internet available? Do they have fiber optics in the line? Is it hardwired for landlines? What's the security system? Is that hardwired? Is that is that Wi-Fi, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors? Are they all hardwired together? You may be looking at things like if there's what's the and sorry, I'm trying to think off the top of my head here, but the sprinkler systems. You may want to see if those sprinkler systems are in place because a lot of jurisdictions do require them now. So you want to look at all of those things. Included fixtures, appliances, and licenses. So we talked about the restaurant, hypothetical restaurant. So what fixtures and appliances are being sold with the property? If there is a liquor license, you'll need to have that information as well. And if it's being included in the overall sale. Age of the roof, windows and doors. We all know how to do that. Again, security, internet, and phone systems. And then you're also going to need to know the amount of land to be included in the sale, if any. I say if any. Because it's not unusual in commercial for the building and the land to be separate and owned by two separate parties. We're not going to get into that because that's a whole nother training, but it is important to see whether the seller owns the building or the land or both. So in the case that you ever wondered why you will see properties go up, like just hypothetically in Eaton Park, and the Eaton Park goes out of business and the building sits there forever, then all of a sudden it's torn down and then a Chipotle gets built. A lot of times that's because the seller owns the land and the business owns the building. Okay, so they're leasing the land and building their own building. So in commercial, those two can be owned by two totally different parties. So it's important to ask those questions. All right, gather documentation. What documentation are you likely going to need? You're going to need title documents from when they purchased the property. Having a copy of that deed is also helpful. A lot of times you can pull that online through the government website, but ask the seller. They may have a copy of it. You want to ask them if they have any surveys or plot maps. And again, you can pull that on RPR, you can pull that on Relist, but if they have a survey, that's way more helpful than just plot maps. You're going to want to collect the property tax records on the property so you know what the taxes are. You want to know what the zoning information is. We talked about how to get that. You want a copy of all lease agreements. So any tenants that are in there, you need to have those lease agreements. Any financial statements. So financial statements say the profit or the loss of this investment over the period of time. So make sure you have financial statements from the seller. You want to look at environmental reports if they have any. Have they done any phase 1 studies? Have they done do they have any type of environmental reports? This is super, super important when it comes to industrial sites or any site that had any type of gasoline, petroleum products at all on them, because there are surveys and stuff that need to be done before the buyer can buy it. So if you're looking at anything that's industrial, anything that used to be a gas station, any place that used to do oil changes, so any type of automotive repair shop that had oil pits, it's very important that you ask for those environmental reports. You want to ask if they've had any previous appraisals or evaluations done by a third party. You want to do your manifest list for chattel. For those of you who don't know what chattel is, those are the items that are included that are not considered real estate. So those are going to be like equipment. We talked about the restaurant with the equipment in the kitchen. That is chattel. So you want to have a manifest list of any chattel being conveyed. And then you need the list of all available utilities, which we talked about. All right, before we move on, any questions, comments, thoughts? All right, let's move right on. Pricing the property competitively. All right, so there's a couple different ways that you can price a property for commercial. Residential is, again, it's way easier. We are all very well versed in the sales comparison approach to residential. We have a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house in Riverside School District that sits on a city lot. And we are going to compare it to other 3-bedroom, 1-bath houses in Riverside on a city lot that have sold in the last 12 months that are of comparable condition, right? And we take all of those and we find the closest comparable, and then we base our listing price based off of the most similar property that has sold within the time frame. Residential is beautiful that way because it is really, really easy to figure out what the listing price should be. Commercial, way more complicated. Okay, but there's 3 different ways there's more than 3, but the 3 different ways that are most common is going to be your comparable approach, your price per square foot, and your income approach. So let's kind of look at each one. So your comparable approach is very similar to how you're doing your sales comparison approach to your single family residential homes. We're taking like for like. And if your commercial property is in an area where it's very similar to a lot of other commercial locations in that area, you could do a sales comparison approach and it could be very accurate. However, most of the time, there are no comps. So not saying that you should completely ditch this method from the beginning, but do a quick search to see if there are any comparable properties to yours. You may find that there are none, and that's okay. Don't get discouraged because that's really not the approach that we typically use, but always check that first, because if there are other comps in the area that are very, very similar to your commercial property, that makes your job way easier. Next is the price per square foot. So you want to find comparable properties that have sold that are kind of like yours. So maybe retail for retail, industrial for industrial, and maybe they're similar, but all of the comps are way bigger, or maybe the comps are way smaller, or they're comparable, but they're not comparable enough to use for the sales comparison approach. So you can use the price per square foot approach, and that's finding your comps that are all similar, but different square footages, figuring out what the average square foot is, and then comparing it to your property to figure out what the price per square foot is. Then, which is the most common, is the income approach. So if a property generates rental income or income of any kind, you can use the income approach to figure out what that property is worth. So we're going to go into these in a little bit more detail. Using the comparable approach. So the first thing you want to do is define your search parameters. You want to figure out specifically what type of comps you're looking for. So again, you want to look into comparable type. So if we're selling a retail building, you would want to look for other retail buildings. You would want to do comparable size, same thing as we do for residential, square foot. So if you have a 10,000 square foot residential building, you need to find other properties that are, or retail building, you would want to find other retail buildings that are probably within that window of like 9,000 square foot to 11,000 square foot. Location, it's got to be in the same location, same submarket. And submarket, for those of you who don't know, like we are the Pittsburgh region, but our submarket would be Beaver Falls or Newcastle or Elwood City or Beaver. Those are kind of our submarkets or neighborhoods. You want to make sure that the age and condition of the property are comparable. So you wouldn't want to use something that's built in 1920 and compare it with something that was built in 2016. So you want to make sure that that window of time is pretty close. And it's hard to find anything that was built in the same year, but you want to make it as pretty close as possible. Again, use and relevant features and characteristics. So next, you can utilize your online databases, which we've already gone over. I won't go over those again. Review the sales and lease comps for those. So you want to see what the current, what the past sales were, what they're leasing for, and then you want to do an adjustment of the differences. This is exactly, using the comparable approach is exactly how you would do residential, just in commercial form. So next we will look at pricing the property by square footage. Okay, so you want to research the comparable properties. Again, we have found them in the same style, same location. They're all built around the same time. However, we can't hone in on comparable square footage. So we have to take it a step deeper and say, okay, we found our comps, but the square footage is all over the board. We have stuff that's 2,000 square feet. We have stuff that's 30,000 square feet. We have mine that's 10,000 square feet. How do I adjust the difference? Because I've got a good basis of comps for retail locations, but they're all different sizes. And I don't know how to comp these up or down to make them, comparable. So we would take a further step and we would do the square footage approach. Research the comparable sales, which you've already done. We consider the market conditions. So we want to make sure that the listing that we have is going to be usable, that it's not obsolete. And then we're going to calculate price adjustments. So if we're finding that our market area is selling for $36 a square foot, we can take the 2,000 square foot property and we can compare it to the 10,000 square foot property to figure out what that sales price difference is. So you take the $36 per square foot times 2,000 square feet, or the 10,000 times $36 a square foot to figure out what that price should be. Next is the income approach, which we're going to spend a little bit more time on. Income approach for the property is what you're going to be using the most. Okay, it is the most, and this is what appraisers will use the most as well when we're talking about commercial properties that bring in income. So what we're going to be looking for the evaluation is we're going to be looking at the future value of income that is generated from the property. So the future value. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to determine the net operating income. So determine the gross income and minus all of your expenses. Okay, which seems pretty easy. Think of it in terms that you can understand on how you run your household. Okay, how anybody runs their household. If somebody has a gross income from their employment of $100,000 a year, and after they subtract their mortgage, their electric, their gas, their food, their water, their sewage, their travel expenses back and forth to work, their medical insurance, so on and so on and so on and so forth, they find that at the end of the year, they have $35,000 worth of expendable money. Expendable money meaning money that's not utilized by living, okay? Because you have to live. You have to live. So that would be for, if you're comparing it to your own personal income, that would be your NOI, $35,000 of money left over that you get to decide what to do with, that is not connected to you being able to live, breathe, and function. Okay. And that works exactly the same way in commercial. So you take your gross income for the year, you subtract things out like taxes, insurance, maintenance, vacancy, bad debt, property management fees, whatever that may be. And then you figure out what the NOI is, your net operating income for a year. So the leftover money. Next, you want to determine the cap rate. It's called a capitalization rate, commonly referred to as a cap rate. And you determine what the cap rate is for the market. If you don't know how to manually figure out a cap rate, that's okay. You can go on to Realist or NAR's RPR report, and that will tell you what the cap rate should be for our market. Okay, that makes it really easy. I'm not going to get into how to manually calculate cap rates today. We can do that in a follow-up training. But for right now, you can go on to the RPR report and it will tell you what the cap rate is for that area. Number 3, you're going to calculate the property value. The property value equals the NOI divided by the cap rate. So that's going to tell you what the property value is. Property value equals the net operating income divided by the cap rate. And number 4, you're going to adjust for vacancies and any additional expenses. Okay, so these would be adjustments for over normal vacancy rates that your buyer or the buyer may have, and any expenses that may occur that's different from the current market. Any questions on this stuff? And we're going to go over it a little bit more. But any questions thus far? Am I losing anybody? No? Okay. Everybody's just asleep at this point. Okay. All right. So the easiest way I have found to figure out how a property will generate its future income. So remember that when we're looking at the income approach, you're looking at the future potential income generated off of a property. And that's really hard. That's really hard to get used to saying. We're looking at the future income, the future benefit of the property. Okay, so what I do for my clients is I do what's called a pro forma. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at one of those. So let me pull that up and pull it over for you. 1 second. It booted me out of the system while I was on here talking to you all. Now, hold real quickly for me as this thing is making me sign in. All right, there we go. All right, now it's coming back up. Let me pull this over so you can see it on your screen. All right, so this is a pro forma. And let me see if I can get this to enlarge so everybody can see it a little better because it is a whole lot of numbers in here. And I know it's got to be hard to see on your screen. So let me see if I can enlarge this in. All right, perfect. That should be big enough. Can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so this is a pro forma, and this helps me as a commercial agent figure out the future value or the future yield of a property when I'm listing something or when I represent a buyer and we're looking at a potential property. It's fairly simple to use. This is not something that I bought somewhere. This is a Excel spreadsheet that I've just made over the years with the information that I'm commonly asked by clients. So the very first top is the property information, and I put that information in here, and I just use 123 Main Street in Newcastle as an example. This is a commercial property, so there's no beds, no baths. It was built in 1960. It's frame construction. Taxes are $21.66. I have in here insurance. This is what the current seller's paying on insurance per year. We have fair market here. This is a commercial listing. I have a drop down for that. And let's say that we're putting in $100,000 as what we think the property will be worth. I also have this ticker in here for a flood zone too, because remember, your clients are getting a copy of this. Next, we have the pro forma. We're putting in some information about the acquisition of the property. Okay, so our max offer price is going to be $70,000. They're going to pay me $3,000 to do the transaction. We have their closing costs in here, so it looks like they're going to need around $75,610 to bring to closing. And then we want to put information about the income of the property. Let's say this property is a 5-unit apartment building. We're just, We're just making up this building at this time. So it's a 5-unit apartment building, and each one of the units rent for $675 times 5. That's $33.75. So we're going to put $33.75 in here. All right, so that's their gross rents. Now you're going to see I have deductions because we're trying to find out what the monthly NOI for the property is. So $33.75 is our gross rents collected. We're taking out 1/12 of the taxes for the property taxes. So we want to take that out on a monthly basis. Our insurance, 1/12 of the insurance amount for the year. That's $50 a month. Management fees on this, that's going to be $506.25. We have lease placements because remember, there's always additional fees when we lease up properties, and we're assuming that, you know, there's going to be some of that prorated through the year. We have a vacancy allowance in here. So we're assuming that out of these 5 units, 10% of the yearly rent is going to be attributed to a vacancy or a turnover because people come and go all the time. And we're allowing for some maintenance in here as well because we know that things break. So this is calculating out to us that our operating expenses are going to be $1,383.63 every month, bringing our monthly NOI down to $1,991.38. Now in here, I have the rehab. I'm assuming that we're probably going to need to do some maybe deferred maintenance on the building. Maybe the landscaping is lacking and the front steps need to be done. And there's an older hot water tank in there that just really could use replaced. And some of these units need some new flooring in there. So we're gonna put $15,000 in there. We're also going to leave what's called a change order variance, meaning that we're kind of putting a float in there that says we're assuming there's $15,000 worth of fees, but what if we go in there after closing and we find that there's termites in the property and now the termites need to be treated? Or maybe we go in there and we replace the one hot water tank, but then we find out that the second hot water tank is bad. So this kind of gives them that little float or that buffer saying, we're saying it's 15, but it could be 16.5. We're not sure. So we're just leaving ourselves some room. Once I put this information in, it's calculating a lot of the acquisition amounts down here on the bottom. I'm not going to go over all of these details because a lot of these details are specific to how my clients buy with their notes, and it's really something that you're probably not going to encounter a lot. I will get into private notes in the follow-up, in a follow-up training. But like I said, I don't want to overwhelm anybody with too much commercial information right off the bat because it really can be really hard to digest when you're not used to working in a commercial setting. So we're going to keep it simple. Here we have our purchase amount, we have our acquisition fees, we have our closing costs, we have our rehab amount. And this here is telling me that this client is going to be all in on this property, $92,110. Okay. This expense detail kind of busts that out a little further and gives this NOI. We're not using note information today, so we're going to take that out. If there was a note, any type of private note, commercial loan, mortgage of any kind, we would need to add that back in, but we're just going to keep this simple and assume that they're paying cash for this commercial investment. So their NOI is going to be $1,991.38. All right, so that's giving them their NOI. I also have this calculated out for some refi comparisons. Again, this is not something that you're going to have to worry about. We will get into that a little bit more when it comes to types of commercial loans, some non-traditional financing, some in one of the follow-ups. All right, so next we come down to rate of return. This is probably the most important because this is going to pump out the figures that you put in above to see if this is going to be a sound investment or not. So we can see that after we purchase this property and we put some work into it, the client will automatically have $7,890 worth of equity or appreciation into the property. So they're not going to be over and above. The property's not, in essence, the property's not going to be worth less than what they put into it. So think of this as a savings account. If you're purchasing the property and putting renovation money into the property and the property is now worth more than those two costs put together, you have equity. And your equity should be treated just like a savings account. The money is sitting there until you decide to liquidate it and cash out that equity. So the fact that they have $7,890 in equity right off the bat is a great thing. Loan to value, if they're getting a loan for the value of the property, they would be at a 92% loan to value. I can tell you, unfortunately, when it comes to commercial loans, that's not a great thing. So they may not be able to pull out 100% of their purchase price and the renovation that they put into it in day one. Most commercial loans are looking at about a 75 to 80% loan to value. So usually investors know that they are going to have to put some cash into the transaction, have some skin in the game. They're not over 100%. That is definitely something we'd have to look at. But just as a rule of thumb, make sure that you're talking with your commercial clients to see what their loan to value goals are. Their net yield is 25.94% on this particular property, meaning that this property in hypothetical standpoint would have an amazing net yield based on holding the property. I always give them a primary use and a secondary use for all of their properties. So the best and highest use of this property is going to be for rental purposes because it has such a tremendous net yield to it. A secondary use for this particular property would be owner occupant. If that person was going to live in one of the units, that would be the second highest and best use. There really isn't a whole other lot that you could do with it. You could really not flip it because there's really not enough spread in there to be able to go in and completely retool the building and then resell it. It's gonna cost them more money. And it is an apartment building, so they really couldn't turn it into retail or anything else. This gives a bunch of different numbers, all which work with residential. Keep in mind, most of my commercial experience is with commercial residential properties, portfolio building. So a lot of that goes into this. Again, we will talk about that later in another, in another follow-up training. So one thing we also look at is debt service coverage ratios when it comes to commercial properties. I will go over this in more detail later on, what that means for getting a loan and getting a mortgage on that property. We look at things like the gross rent multiplier. So this is what we're talking about, the income of the property. So we have, this is the market rent. If we're assuming the property is going to be held for a period of 7 years before fully paid back, the value of the property would increase to $283,500 if they can get their financials in line and provide those financials to the buyer when they go to sell it later on. We also look at things like loan to cost, which again, we're not going to get into, but we will look at that in follow-up trainings. Here we go. Here's the one I wanted to see. Rent to value ratio. So if you're getting into any type of rental properties, whether those are residential rentals or retail rentals or storage units or mobile home parks, there's all kinds of different things that you can get into. A lot of investors, especially if they're, from California, Washington, Utah, they're going to ask you what that rent to value ratio is. Rent to value ratio on average is about 0.75% on the West Coast. They have a very, very low rent to value ratio. However, us here in Pittsburgh, our properties to purchase are rather affordable and our rents are rather high. So we have a very high rent to value ratio. Your rent to value ratio is very, very easy to calculate. And the easiest way that I can explain it to you is that if you are purchasing a property for $100,000 to get a 1% rent value ratio, that property has to bring in a gross income of $1,000. So 1%. 1% of $100,000 is $1,000 per month. That's a 1% rent value ratio. So in this case, if we have a market value of $92,110, so that's what we purchased the property and put in with renovations, and we have a gross monthly income of $3,375, this rent to value ratio is 3.66%, which is outstanding in this hypothetical example. All right, so we will go over this more when we do the follow-up training. I will show you how to build a pro forma And we'll go through all of the additional steps when it comes to mortgaging and leveraging and all of that good stuff. But I just wanted to keep it pretty simple for our first one. Any questions on the pro forma? No?
So that one, I mean, generally you would use if it's residential that you would have rentals on.
Well, that particular pro forma, yes, is based for residential. Now, if you're looking at, you can also use it for retail space that's generating income. So you would want to use the income basis or the income approach if the commercial property is generating income. That's when you use the income approach.
Okay.
If it's a commercial property that is not generating income, that would be considered a owner occupant property, then the income approach is not readily used. Then they're looking at more price per square footage.
Okay.
Most of the time when working with commercial properties, not always, but most of the time, the income approach is going to come into play. All right. Commercial listings, prepping your listing document. So you have gotten this far with your commercial listing and you are finally ready to have them sign those listing documents so that you can put it online. First, you want to select the correct documents. You want the listing agreement, which is XLSC, and that is the exclusive right to sell or lease commercial property. That is a PAR document. You're also going to need your disclosure requirements, which is your commercial property information sheet, your CPI. This is very simple. This is very similar to a seller's disclosure, but it's more of like a question and answer of like, what do you have in the property? How many rentable units do you have in the property? And it will ask them things like age of the roof and who put it on. But it does look quite different than the residential seller's disclosure that you are all used to seeing. So you may want to pull that up in your PAR documents and really familiarize yourself with the property information sheet. Oil, gas, and mineral right addendum. This is really important. The OGMX. It's the exact same form that we use on residential listings, exactly the same. And then you need any type of state supplement. So your consumer notice and your seller's cost sheet. And those, again, are exactly the same as the residential. Now, your lead-based paint is only required for residential commercial built before 1978. So again, with that same example of that 5-unit apartment building, you will need the lead-based paint disclosure because they are residential units built before 1978. However, if you are listing a retail establishment that has no residential units, you do not need the lead-based paint disclosure. Setting up your template. All right, so you would want to set up your template for commercial transactions before you have a commercial transaction, not after. So I highly suggest that those of you with SkySlope access already, those of you who are unlicensed and are still in training will not have access to this yet, but you do want to set up your documents and your templates in SkySlope when you do get access. All right. So to set up your commercial template, you're going to open SkySlope, and in the apps, you're going to select the drop-down menu and select Forms. Select the templates from the top menu, click Create Template. Then you want to name your template. Search from the forms on the list that I just gave you in the previous slide. Click Add. Once all the forms are selected, click Next, and then fill out your information that will appear on every document, not just the one you're working on, every document, and then click Save. It's that easy. If you need help setting up your SkySlope templates, this is where Tori comes in, and Tori's on the line with us now. So go ahead and make that appointment with Victoria to come in, and she will help set up your SkySlope and help you select and create the templates that you will use for all of your transactions. It's super important that you have all of the documents that you need to stay in compliance and that you're using the right ones. So please don't try to guess. Just make that appointment with Victoria. She can set that up for you and make sure that when you show up at your listing appointment, you are completely prepared to be up and running. All right, marketing your listing. So we've gone through this whole thing, and it's been a long journey to get us here to this commercial listing, and you finally have the listing paperwork. Now what do you do? Okay, because it's not just as easy as throwing it online and hoping somebody comes along. Is it possible? Absolutely. It's completely possible that you're just going to get a buyer that drops out of space, sees it on the MLS, and makes an offer on that property. But with commercial listings, it's way harder. The average days on market that we see are only for residential properties. They're only for residential properties. So if you pull up the average days on market and it's telling you 36 days, please do not tell your commercial seller that it's only going to take 36 days to get an offer, because that is only residential properties. Depending on the market conditions, the property that you list can sell rather quickly because maybe a buyer has been waiting for something like this to come on the market. And I can tell you from my own experience, sometimes it can take years to sell commercial property. So you want to make sure that you're setting up these expectations with your seller far in advance and letting them know that it's not as easy to calculate how quickly or how not quickly this property will sell. It's just a matter of finding that needle in the haystack, which is the buyer to buy this commercial property. So how do we start off on the right foot and make sure that the right people are seeing your commercial listing? Start your marketing efforts off on the right foot by providing professional photos and video. Hire a photographer to do your photos, videos, and drone photography. Unless you have professional equipment and you are well versed in doing photos, please don't take your own photos. Please hire a professional to do that, because if you have crappy photos online, nobody is ever going to look at your listing. This goes for both commercial listings and residential listings. There's nothing that burns my behind more than going online and looking at a new listing and having the photos be cloudy, dark, or sideways. So do yourself a favor, do your seller a favor who is paying you and entrusting you to market their property, and hire a professional. You need to get some custom signage. So commercial signs are made to order. They are custom ordered signs. It's not very often that you're going to have a commercial location that can take one of our residential post signs. So you need to order those commercial signs in advance. The size and the location of the signs will depend on the property. Sometimes they have to go in a parking lot with cement buckets and a custom made frame for them. Sometimes we have to put commercial signs 3 stories up on a building. Sometimes the signage has to be displayed in a window, so we need window signage for it. It's very important that you're checking the signing requirements before you list the property. In addition to that, some markets, some jurisdictions limit the size and location of any type of signage that you can put on a commercial building. So you want to make sure that you're checking with the municipality to make sure that your signs are the right size and placed in the right location. The worst thing you can do is pay $400 for a commercial sign to be custom printed and delivered, and then find out that the city won't let you put it up or fines you for putting it up. You also want to think about the installation of these signs as well. You are going to have to hire somebody special to put signs in certain places. And there may be certain material that's needed to place those signs. So like I was saying, sometimes we have to put them on a 2nd or 3rd story building for them to be visible. And that requires somebody who has a bucket truck, or it has the ability to rent one and has the permits and the insurance to do that, to actually install your sign. So the sign install does require some additional footwork and is quite more expensive than residential signage. Marketing pro forma pack. Once you're on the market, you'll be asked for a pro forma and financial pack of information from potential buyers and other agents. It's important that you have that information together. We went over a little bit of that in this training, but we'll dive more into that in the follow-up training. Marketing your property efficiently. So one big one is online presence. And of course, you want to have your property on the MLS, but I can tell you that most buyers are not going to find commercial properties on the MLS. The MLS does not IDX feed commercial properties the same way as they do residential. So it's quite possible that that your commercial property is not going to show up on our website, co-broke websites, Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com. It's not uncommon for them not to pull. You have to actually search by the property address to find those listings embedded deep inside the website. And why? It's just because most of our business is residential. So all of our websites, not just ours, but the entire industry, has their websites designed to display residential properties first. So what do we do when we list something commercial? There are other platforms that are more commonly used than the MLS to search for commercial properties, and LoopNet, CoStar, and Crex is one of those. So you can list them on one of those sites. I suggest all of those sites because that is where the traffic is going. Think of these websites like Zillow for the commercial world. The investors are going to these sites, and then the residential home buyers are looking on places like Zillow and on our website and on realtor.com for their single family homes. Next, you want to do targeted email campaigns. This is where you're going to get a lot of your leads from, is you want to build a database of the potential buyers in the area. Whether those are local investors or big companies, you want to make sure that you're getting their information and you're targeting them through an email campaign. Next, you want to find out public relations and media coverage. So again, it's all about who you know and who knows you. You want to generate that buzz around it. Very first thing I do whenever I get a commercial listing is I go down to the municipality office and I'll talk to the mayor. I'll talk to the zoning officer. I'll go to that board of realtors, and then I start talking about it and generating that buzz. Okay. So make sure that you continuously network with people and get as much coverage on the property as possible. Also, if you have something that a commercial listing that's in an area that has any type of business organization, like the Chamber of Commerce or any type of business group or networking event, investors, investor meetings or group, you want to tell them about it. You want to give them that marketing information because it's likely that they will pass that out to their members as well. The closing process. What happens next? Okay, so you have the property on the market and you have found a buyer. What happens next? First, you're going to go ahead and negotiate the offers, and you're going to go through with closing the deal. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go the offer review, and you're carefully going to evaluate all the offers, considering the buyer's qualifications and the terms of the deal. This is something that goes without saying. Okay, we're going to negotiate the deal on behalf of our buyer or seller, depending on who we're representing in that transaction, and we're going to guide them through the closing process. These steps are no different than any type of residential closing that we're going to do. Now, as we know from closing residential transactions, it sounds really easy on the surface. You review the offer, you negotiate, and you close. But there's all kinds of sub-steps in between. In residential, there's inspections and appraisals and final walkthroughs and reply to the appraisal conditions and financing. There's all these steps in between. But commercial has very similar sub-steps in between. They're just very different than residential. All right, first they're going to look at the title search. So commercial properties also require a title search, just like residential. Commercial properties tend to be larger and more complex than residential properties. So the title search is a little bit more complex, a little bit more lengthy than it is residential. We tend to find a lot of title issues and encumbrances on investment style properties or commercial properties in general, just because there's a lot of financial in and out there, where residential properties there usually isn't. So commercial properties may have a higher likelihood of encountering title issues and encumbrances. Things that we find on there are going to be liens, easements, zoning requirements, environmental concerns, complex ownership structures. So things like trusts, owning properties in LLCs or LPs, or having a LLC that owns an LP that bought the property in a trust. So you have to understand those ownership structures and how they're built out to be able to have clear title on it. One thing that we find more than anything else are unpaid taxes or unsatisfied ownership rights to the property. So maybe the seller owns the land and he sold the right to build to a big corporation who put a restaurant there. Well, then the restaurant went under and they abandoned the property. And now the seller's leasehold agreement says with them that they own the property if they abandon it after 12 months, but he really never got a satisfaction from the previous tenant who owned the building. So it can become this big complex web that the title company has to unweave. And a lot of times there are title issues on there that have to be satisfied before the policy can be written. So just make sure that you're notifying sellers of that potential conflict or that hurdle that you're going to have to get through, and let them know that you are counting on their cooperation to make all of this happen. Also with title, they're going to review the leases and any type of encumbrances on the property. So if it's an income generating property, they need to know the leases. They need to know who's in each unit, if rents were paid, if they were not paid, what security deposits are there, so that they can be transferred over to the new owner. And also UCC liens and judgments also come into play when we're talking about commercial properties, especially in places like restaurants and doctors' offices that have a lot of equipment that they may have bought on a loan. They may have UCC liens filed against them. So these are some of the things that the title company is up against. Commercial due diligence. So there's, just like with residential properties, there's an inspection period. And if you've sold a residential property, you know that there's a bunch of different inspections that you can elect or waive. You could do a home inspection, a pest inspection, a radon inspection, all of these different inspections. And you usually have 10 days to do them. Commercial due diligence is completely different. So in a commercial contract, the buyer usually has 30 days to do whatever inspections they want and do any type of feasibility study that they want to do. They do not limit them to what inspections they can have, and they don't have to follow the a la carte list of inspections like the residential does. So during the due diligence period, the buyer can conduct any type of inspection they want. They can use a certified home inspector, they can use a licensed contractor, doesn't matter. There's, no written rule in there. But during this time period, they're going through the property and they're checking the structure and the roof and the major mechanicals of the property, just like a traditional home inspection. But they're also checking things like environmental assessments and studies, zoning evaluations, getting a survey on the property. And they're also checking their financials to make sure that the property is financially feasible to move forward. So they're going to be reviewing things like leases, security deposit, market demographics, all of this stuff to make sure that not only are they buying a solid building that is zoned appropriately, that can be used for the purpose that they choose to use it for, and that they're getting the amount of land that the seller said they were getting, but also if all of these things check out, that this property is going to be profitable, or this property is going to be able to be used for the function that the buyer wants to use it for. So this is called our general due diligence period. And like I said, this normally lasts 30 days for most standard size commercial properties. But if you have a property that has a lot of complexity behind it, especially like industrial, that period of time could be 60 days, 90 days. Sometimes it could even be 6 months, just depending on the number of layers you have to a commercial property. We talked about the financial analysis, so making sure that the property makes sense for them financially. It's also common for them to check for permits and approvals like non-conforming use permits, variance permits, zoning requirements, so on and so forth. Next part of this due diligence is the environmental studies through the EPA. So the environmental studies a lot of times has to be done if the property was used for a purpose in the past. So again, we're talking more industrial, manufacturing, gas station, automobile repair shop, things of that nature. It's not uncommon if at any point in the last 100 years, this property was used for that purpose, that they can call for what's called a phase environmental study. And there's 3 different types of studies that can be utilized. First is the phase 1, which is most common, and that is where they review all the historical documents and site inspections to see what the past use for that property was. Is there a high likelihood of ground and soil contamination with this property? Why do they do that? Does anybody know from your studies why we even have phase environmental studies? Who can tell me?
Uh, underground tanks and stuff could be leaking and other environmental hazards.
So what happens? What happens if there's an underground tank? I'm going to give you a scenario. What happens if there's an underground tank that has been leaking for many, many, many years, 30, 40 years. The seller sells that property to a buyer, and the buyer is aware that it's been leaking. And they say, that's fine. We're just going to take it out. The buyer comes, they open up the tank, they take it out so it doesn't leak anymore. They cover it back up. And then 10 years from now, the city finds that tank was contaminating the water system, and the residents of that neighborhood ended up with cancer. Who's to blame?
The new owner, because they didn't take care of the issue when it was found out. If they had figured it out and done the phase one, then the previous owner would have been responsible for it instead of the new owner.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So even though the previous owner installed the tanks and failed to maintain the tanks, and when the new buyer bought the property, day one they owned it, they took it out and solved the problem. When they found out about it and it was leaking into the system, they come after the current owner. Now, can they come after previous owners too? Yes. But they come after the current landowner of the property because they did not do their proper due diligence and have the EPA come in. So you want to be very careful when representing buyers on commercial properties, because that liability passes through every time the property is sold, because it is the buyer's responsibility to do the due diligence prior to purchase. So if that would occur, you do the phase one study where they're checking the history of the property and saying there's very little to no concern that we would have any type of environmental contamination. You've learned in your studies about green fields and how the EPA can come in and rope off an area for 100 years. If you want to go down a deep dive in history, because I'm like a total history nerd, look up Chernobyl. Chernobyl is an area in Russia where they had a nuclear plant explode, and it has been a quarantined area since that day, since I think that was back in the early 80s that this happened. That is the most extreme version of environmental contamination. But if you are in your studies now and you really want to understand how all of that works and why this is important, please go in and watch one of the videos. They're on Netflix, they're on the Discovery Channel. You can YouTube it, about Chernobyl. And it's well documented. I also watch follow-up documentations about all the puppies that are there now that only have 3 toes. So that's interesting. Again, rabbit hole on YouTube is where I go. So anyway, these are why we have these environmental studies here in the United States, because we've had similar issues as well. If you didn't know, there are whole communities out there, and there are 2 here in Pennsylvania that have been quarantined off and are now a green field, which means that they are contaminated for whatever reason, and nobody is allowed to live there. They're completely roped off like they no longer exist. There are houses there from the 1960s that are all boarded up like they were just abandoned yesterday, and nobody is allowed to go on these properties. In fact, if you take a short drive to Rochester, there is a greenfield contamination area in Rochester in one of our old steel mill areas. It has a big chain link fence around it. If you look beyond the fence, it looks like a jungle. They've done very, very good at concealing what's behind there because they have planted trees and they've allowed the vines and everything to grow up. But there is an environmental contamination site right in Rochester. So this is a huge problem and something you need to do to protect your clients. So the phase 1 environmental study will look at the history, and then that will tell you whether you should move on to a phase 2 study. I can also tell you if the person is getting any type of commercial loan, the lender is going to ask you to do it. So you might as well just get on board and buckle up and do the phase study. So phase 2 environmental site study happens when there is some type of history or record that there could be potential contamination with the property. So again, they're going to look at the prior uses of the property. Was this for manufacturing? Was this for industrial? Was there ever a gas station there? Was this an automotive shop? There's a lot of different cases in which they're going to hit this for a phase 2 study. The phase 2 study requires additional information. That is where they are going to bring out a site inspector to take samples of the soil, samples of the rock. They're going to conduct their own surface study. They're going to take samples of any type of groundwater, any leftover material to see if there's any type of contamination. And again, contamination could be a lot of things. This could be petroleum residue. This could be radiation. This could be a whole asbestos is something that we find on phase 2 studies. Asbestos contamination from breakdown of asbestos. So there's lots of things that can really hurt the environment and depreciate the value of the property. The last thing you want is to have your buyer buy a property and then end up getting sued because somebody died, or having the property now have zero value because the EPA has shut it down. All right, so what happens if we go through our phase 1 and they say, yes, there could be the risk of contamination. We have the soil scientist and inspector come out, do the phase 2, and there is contamination. Then it moves on to a phase 3 environmental site assessment. Okay, so this is when the EPA jumps in and says, hey, we're here to help. And I promise you, it is never a great thing when the EPA shows up on scene. But they're going to decide what the remediation and cleanup looks like. So they're going to say that we need to implement measures to address any type of environmental issues. This could be just about anything. So if this is asbestos contamination, they could say, well, we need remediation. We need to, we need to remove that asbestos by somebody who is certified. This needs to be taken off site. This needs to be disposed of, in a way that we say, at a location that we say, or the remediation could be shutting it down altogether. And that's where we end up with these lost neighborhoods where nobody's allowed in, with the big chain link fence around them that says, no entry by order of the US government. Then they're going to talk about if it can be salvaged, what activities are going to be involved. Is there going to be any excavation of the soil removal, groundwater treatment? What's going to be done in addition to that to clean up the soil that's now affected by whatever was there? And where we're using the example of asbestos. So the asbestos broke down, it leached into the soil, it has got into the groundwater. We've taken care of the source, but how are we going to clean up the soil now? Then they're going to go into regulatory coordination, and they're going to have agencies there to help with the inspection to make sure that you're doing it exactly the way that you need to, and they're going to monitor ongoing success of the mitigation. And then we're talking about restoring the property condition. So they're going to say, when is a suitable time, or what is the suitable condition that has to occur before we will restore the property to be able to be used. So these are kind of the steps. Me personally, I have never gotten to a phase 3. I have gotten through the phase 1 and phase 2 multiple times. Usually, once you get to the phase 2, the buyer no longer wants the property, and for good reason. We have never made it to a phase 3. I cannot give you any personal experience on a phase 3. I'm assuming that it's not a great situation, but can't give you any personal experience on that, because if we do go to a phase 2 and we find soil contamination, I have always pulled my clients out of the deal. So if anybody does go to a phase 3, please let me know how that goes. All right, commercial property inspections. When you're inspecting the property, oh, go ahead.
Quick question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're
is that like I'm actually want to get into commercial and land development, but is that like a standard if you run into a phase 3, just go ahead and pull your client out so they can start looking for new property?
Nope, not necessarily. It has to depend on what your client wants. Has to be their choice. But just a rule of thumb, if you get a phase 2 inspection and the soil is contaminated, it is highly likely that the buyer is going to run for the hills. So at that point, if it's your listing, you're going to have to pivot back to your seller and say, okay, we have a problem here. We have a problem. For them to go through into phase 3 and take on that liability of cleaning up the soil is a huge liability for a buyer. And with commercial buyers, most of them have attorneys who are going to advise them to get out of the deal.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So commercial inspection, what are they looking for on commercial inspections? Very similar, very similar to what we're doing with residential: roof, plumbing, structural, HVAC, sewer, water lines, environmental hazards, and, just about everything. The inspection that they're going to do is really going to be geared to the individual commercial property because, like I said, with single family residential, although we have lots of different types of single family residential construction, they're all very similar in comparison to commercial properties, which are all over the board. So what they're looking for and how you're going to conduct your inspection is really going to be property specific. So keep in mind that a commercial inspection can be done by a contractor and is less often done by a home inspector than residential. Many times it includes multiple appointments over a course of 30 days. So it's not going to be, hey, we're going to come in for an inspection. It's going to take 2 hours, then we're going to get out of here. So please, let your sellers know that you need to give uninhibited access to the commercial property over a span of about 30 days because they're going to be coming and going for multiple appointments. And inspections may be subject to the future use of the property and not the current use of the property. So again, keep that in mind. Commercial is all about future use, not current use. We're used to in retail single family residential that the current use is going to be the future use. So right now, Jane and John Smith are selling their home that they live in and raise their family in to your buyers who are Jane and John Tamil, who are going to be using it to start their family and raise their family in. So those are like for like. But in commercial, oftentimes, what the current commercial property is being used for will not be the future. So we're looking at the future, not what is, but what could be, depending on what the buyer wants. All right, so just to wrap it up here, to ensure a successful commercial property listing, preparation is everything. Preparation is everything. The majority of our training here today has been about preparation. That took up the first, 40 minutes of us talking about commercial listings. Preparation is key. Next is going to be marketing and developing a comprehensive marketing strategy to attract buyers, because just putting a sign in the yard and putting it on the MLS is not going to work. It is not a residential property. Commercial listings really take a lot of professional marketing, a lot of third-party marketing, and a lot of networking to get them sold. And then negotiation and closing. You have to skillfully navigate the negotiation process and really guide your clients through the closing process, because it is much different. It is way more complex, and it is way trickier than our residential clients. All right. So if you want additional information or education in commercial real estate, there's quite a few things that you can get into. Some of the enrichment and development programs are available on your one.u. Search for things such as commercial real estate fundamentals, commercial leasing, commercial investment analysis, site selection and development, and commercial real estate finance. These can also be found in some outside training facilities like CE Shop, Real Estate Fundamentals Training, Pulley Associates. So if you want some actually in-person training to really hone down on your niche within commercial real estate, you can absolutely do that. Some other specialized training within commercial. So again, we're talking about your sub niche. So me, I'm a commercial agent. My sub niche is portfolio development of residential properties. So that would be my sub niche. So when I went in and I decided who I wanted to be in real estate, I decided that I wanted to be an acquisitions manager. So I went out and got trained as an acquisitions manager. You can also search for things like international commercial real estate, 1031 exchanges, and environmental issues. So if you want to be environmentally certified within commercial, you can get those types of training programs. Usually to be certified in those areas, it is a paid training. They're a little harder to find. So once you get fully engulfed in commercial real estate, please come in and see me and I will help you get the training and the certification that you need. And most importantly, seek mentorship. I don't want anybody leaving this training and going out and listing a commercial real estate property by yourself. We do require, as a brokerage rule, the first time you are listing a commercial property, that you do it with the help of your broker, who is myself. There is no additional charge, but I do require to oversee your first commercial listing. Please keep in mind that this is still in your name. You still do all of the steps, but we just want to make sure that you are being safe and that you are being legal when doing your commercial listing or your first commercial transaction. And I just like to be there to help you along the way, just to make sure that you're completely confident before we let you advertise out there to the world that you are a commercial expert. So please see me on your first transaction and we will guide you through. All right, that is all I have for you today. I'm going to open it up for any type of questions that you may have, any comments, or anything that you want to learn about in the future. Who wants to go first?
I have a question. You had said that most commercial transactions take longer than a year, and I know we can't do like agent agreements longer than 365 days. Like, how does that, like, does it vary because it's a commercial, or do you have
does not. Yeah, that's a great question. And it does not. Your contracts are for 365 days. That's a state law. And that does vary from state to state. But again, it all starts with proper communication with your seller at the very, very beginning. And letting them know that, you know, this could sell in a month. This could take 2 or 3 years to sell. And just setting up those proper boundaries in advance. So let me tell you a quick story in regards to this, Rebecca, and I promise I won't be too long. How I met my husband, Anthony, who is sitting here beside me, is Anthony owned a commercial property out in Beaver Falls. Anthony owned a commercial property out in Beaver Falls that he was going to use for a laundromat. Unfortunately, when Anthony bought this, he was not using his amazing realtor wife that he uses now, and maybe didn't do the proper planning with this building. And it was not zoned correctly. So after many attempts and years to get this zoned properly, he was able to get it zoned where he could put a laundromat there, but then he lost his funding. Okay, so he had no funding to do it. So he called me up through a referral through our attorney. We both used the same attorney, and he had me come out and list this property and gave me 3 months to do so. 3 months was all he gave me, despite the fact that I had told him in advance how difficult in the current market, because our market was crap at that point, by the way, how difficult it was to sell commercial properties. So I was very upfront and forward with him on this. He did not listen, but he gave me 3 months to sell it. Long story short, it never sold. But I could take comfort in the fact that I educated him and I disclosed to him that trying to sell this dilapidated property with weird zoning in Beaver Falls was going to be darn near impossible given the current market conditions, because we were in a down market at that point. And he didn't hold it against me. And in fact, I did such a great job explaining it to him and disclosing it to him that he married me some years later. So moral of the story, just disclose. But no, what I would do with my clients in a case where we would go 365 days is, you just want to preempt them about a month before and say, hey, we're going to need some more documents signed. At that point, you're really going to want to look at the listing and see if you need to make some adjustments. That's a great time to really sit down with your client and say, okay, this is the feedback we've been getting. I've updated the comps. I've relooked at the demographics because things are always changing. This is what's happening in the market. This is how we need to adjust. And this is how we need to pivot for the new year to get this property sold. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. What other questions we have?
I have another one. So do you find that with, like, I know with residentials, there are contingencies and you want to do the contingencies that, satisfy the buyer and what they need. And however, you don't want to do too many because it might deter sellers. Does that happen in commercial? Do you find that there's more contingencies or less?
I don't find that there are more. They're just different. So, with residential, we have micro contingencies. As you know, when you write your offer, it's contingent upon financing. It's contingent upon the home inspection. It's contingent upon the pest inspection. It's contingent upon the well inspection. It's contingent upon survey. It's contingent upon all of the appraisal, you know what I mean? So there's all these micro contingencies for residential. With commercial, it's different. It's one contingency and it's your due diligence contingency. And that is about it. You have 30 days to conduct whatever you want to do, because there's such a broad in commercial, there's such a broad array of things that you're going to have to do or might have to do, because all commercial is so different that it's just a 30-day period. So you have 30 days to figure out whatever you want to figure out, whether that's your mortgage, or whether you want to look at the roof, or whether you want to look at the leases, or whether you want to make sure that the income's going to work, whether you want to make sure that you can do a 1031 exchange on it, whatever that's going to be. The buyer usually has the 30-day opportunity built in to do whatever they want to do on the back end. And so it's way more blanketed than it is with single family, because no two commercial sites are exactly the same. Where in residential, there's usually a lot of comps in between. So it's the same, it's just very different. It's different on how it's approached within the contract.
So it doesn't necessarily deter sellers where in residential it might.
No, not as much. It's the due diligence period is way more common. Now they can decline the due diligence period. They absolutely can decline it, and some people will, but it's not as common.
Thanks.
Any other questions we have on anything that we've learned today, or anything that we didn't cover? No? Well, thank you guys for joining me. Like I said, we will do a follow-up probably in a month or so with a more in-depth look of some of the commercial in and outs. We'll talk about commercial financing as well, because that's a whole different animal. We'll deep dive more into the pro forma. We'll look at a financial packet and how you put that together. We will also look more in depth into commercial types, so we can really start delving into residential, commercial, retail, mixed use, industrial. I'd like to throw agricultural in there as well, because we don't think of agricultural as a commercial function. However, agricultural is a commercial arm. So we'll be throwing some of that in there too, and how, how farmlands can be classified as commercial income properties and some of the nuances with that. So we'll kind of give a little intro into that. If there's anything that you can think of as we're putting the next training together that you would like us to specifically cover, drop me an email and put that in there. And also, if you think of anything later on that maybe you forgot to ask while we were on this slide, please let me know. Shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I'd be happy to tell you what those are. This recording, once it's done processing, will be up on the roguagent.com website for you to review in case you want to jot down any additional notes, or in case I went over anything too quickly. So this recording will be live under the blog and video posts within the drop-down menu. So until I talk to you guys again, I am off tomorrow, just so you know. So if you need me and if it's an emergency, please shoot me a text. Please do not email me tomorrow, because I will have limited access to my email, but just shoot me a text if there's an emergency. So I probably will not talk to most of you tomorrow, but have an amazing weekend ahead, and I will be back in the office on Monday. All right, don't forget, there is a leasing agent training this afternoon. If you are planning on jumping on that, it is online only. So make sure that you are online for the leasing agent training this afternoon. All right, thank you so much, guys, and I will see you this afternoon.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.